All right, 1 o'clock. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Ray Thomas. I am the Research Education Lead for the Tropical Australian Academic Health Centre, sitting up here in Townsville. Oh, let's see how it works. Before we get started, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today. For me, here in Townsville, it's the Wulgurukaba and Bindals people, and I pay respect to their cultures and knowledge, and I also pay my respect to their elders past and present. So for those of you who don't know much about TARC, these are some things that we've done since, around about 2022, stopped counting for a little while. We are a Research Translation Centre accredited by the NH and MRC to build research capability and capacity. Our footprint is Northern Queensland. We do a lot of research training. We do study design and support, statistical consultations and data analyses, stats analyses, and we also have grant rounds that are out. And one's out at the moment, a seed grant is out. So if you're in our TARC footprint and you're a member of one of our TARC partners, then you can apply for a grant. If you need any information, here's our website. We are updating our website, but here it is currently. Okay. So just a couple of housekeeping things. Please, while Catherine is talking, I'll introduce her in a minute, mute your microphones until the Q&A section, and then you can kind of write your questions down and ask her anything you like at the end. It's scheduled for after the presentations. You can either feel free to raise your hand to ask a question, or if you're really shy, you can put them in the chat. But we actually would really super love to see your faces. So if you do have the capacity to have a camera on your computer, it's much nicer to speak to faces than it is to speak to initials. So if you can have your camera on, that would be brilliant to have your camera on. And may I introduce Catherine Seaton. And Catherine has lived and worked in, I'm sorry, but that's awkward. Hi. Catherine has lived and worked in Mount Isa since 2014. She is currently the Research Officer of Murtupuni Centre for Rural and Remote Health. And I am very, very reliably informed that sometime soon, Catherine, in the very near future, Catherine, you will be submitting your PhD. Nod if I am correct. Oh, right. She will be Dr. Catherine Seaton very, very soon.
I just did my confirmation, so it's still a while away.
Yeah, like you didn't do that in 18 months, though, your supervisor told me.
Oh, yeah.
She said
sure.
You were onto it. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, cool. All right, so let's hand it over to Catherine. I'll stop sharing my screen. Catherine will have a chat, and we will get back to you about how to design an amazing poster. Thanks, Catherine. Over to you.
Thank you, Ray. I will just share my screen. Oh, can everyone see that?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. All right, so thank you for coming along to this presentation. This has been created in mind for our Murtupuni Centre for Rural and Remote Health Are You Remotely Interested conference, which is happening in July in a few weeks. But I mean, this is pretty standard information that can really be helpful for anyone who's thinking of making a conference presentation. Before I start, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, the lands that I live and work in, the Kalkadoon people in Mount Isa, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So in this workshop today, we're going to describe things that contribute to making a bad. I actually realized that saying the word bad is probably a bit mean, so I've kind of changed it to ineffective. I wouldn't want you to think that you previously have made a bad poster, but also going how to structure your poster for visual appeal and readability, and also provide some graphic design and layout tips and recommendations, and some software options to make graphic design easier. And now let's all just imagine that you've submitted an abstract to a conference and you've been accepted to present your poster. It might be a facilitated poster. Maybe you can just kind of leave it there and ignore it and design it and your work is done. But the next step is to create, hopefully, an eye-catching and visually attractive poster. And you want to fill it with only the most significant and vital information from your project. If it is a facilitator poster session, you're going to field everyone's questions and inquiries about your topic with grace, obviously, and then you'll collect awards and prizes. It's easy. Now, this is obviously just a silly little comic, but it proves a good point. If you have published a paper about your project, you can't just turn that into a poster in about 20 minutes and think, oh, I'm done. This is going to look great. Everyone's going to want to read about my project, because it's probably a little bit unrealistic to think that someone's going to read something that looks a bit like this. So the purpose of a conference poster is to tell people about your work, and that might be a research project, it might be a program that you're doing through your work, and you want them to know what it is and why it's important, because it's the whole reason why we do this. If you have one, you want to make people want to read your research paper, and you might actually want to receive some feedback or discuss your work with other people who might work in similar fields. And having a well-designed poster is really important because it will engage people, it will grab the eye, it will help you start those conversations about your work, and it might help you network as well. Now, I want you to imagine that you are at a conference and you walk into the poster gallery and you see this wall of text and graphs and images, and you think, oh God, this is overwhelming. What am I supposed to look at first? And I have to say that if I saw a bunch of posters that looked like this, I would probably just keep walking myself. Nothing is really grabbing me. And again, that feels a little bit mean to say, but I just feel like, again, there's so much text, there's so much content on these, I just kind of don't know where to start. And I found all these posters when I was just doing a Google for like scientific poster templates. So I feel like this also reveals some of the dangers of just sort of Googling and trying to find, oh, well, I don't know where to start. How do I actually create a good poster? Because if you just Google it, you're going to find a lot of information that's actually not very helpful. So again, what makes a bad or an ineffective poster? And I've got a few examples of these here. So as you can see, there's a lot of content on this poster. There's hardly any spare room. It might be saying some really, really important things. I mean, it seems to be something to do with space flight and NASA. Like, that's pretty cool, but I don't even know where to start looking on this one. This one is a little bit pixely, so sorry about that. I probably made it a little bit too big. But again, it's just overwhelming the amount of content that is on these. And this one here is kind of a little bit more fun because it's got colors and it's got a little picture of a hamster or something, but it's quite difficult to read, and they've got some silly Star Wars font, and again, I'm not really sure about that. So these are examples of poster designs that we want to avoid. And things that contribute to making a bad poster is having way too much text and content. Text that is really small to read. You don't want people want to be able to see your poster from a meter or two away. They can't be having their face shoved right up in front of it, blocking everyone else from seeing it. You need to make sure you have contrast. So, for example, don't have dark text on a dark background or light text on a light background. Having way too many colors, having inappropriate fonts like Comic Sans in particular, or using a lot of italics, having logos in spots where they're going to distract, having everything in capitals, having irrelevant or bad graphics, including an abstract in your poster, and I'll get to that a bit more in a little bit. Having the text justified, I know that some people really, really love that, but it can make the text a little bit difficult to read, and having textured backgrounds. So instead of having something like the poster on the left, which again is just a wall of text and images that don't really make sense, you want to go for something maybe more like on the right. It doesn't have an overwhelming amount of text. It has some interesting images. The colors are kind of consistent and interesting. And I do want to say that this is blatantly ripped off Animate Your Science online, and I will talk about them again at the end of the conference because they're a really, really good and useful resource for making posters. So when you're preparing your poster, there are 4 main parts that you need to consider, and these are the written information, your layout and graphic design, facilitation, if that's relevant. Obviously, not all conferences do have facilitated poster sessions. And then if it is facilitated, tackling questions. So when you're thinking about your structure and your layout, make sure that you're keeping in mind, who is your ideal audience? Who's going to be at the conference? If you're a nurse and you're going to a nursing conference, then you can be pretty sure that your audience is going to be nurses. So that might allow you to adjust the language that you're going to use. However, if your poster is going to be at a conference that's for a much wider audience, you might need to make sure that people who are not nurses would also be able to understand what you're talking about. The best way to do this is to write in plain English, because it allows you to engage a wider audience. Avoid jargon and complex charts, because you need to remember that just because you're an expert in your topic, not everyone is. And it might make perfect sense to you, but it might be confusing to someone else. If there are any guidelines about formatting and size and layout, make sure you follow them. So usually it's like A0, it might be portrait, it might be landscape. They might not care which one you do, but just make sure that you check those for the conference. Like I said earlier, don't include an abstract in your poster. Use bullet points, because a poster is not a paper. Very important. You will just overwhelm people with the amount of text that you've included. And it's really good to use sections with very, very clear headings. So on not including an abstract in your poster, a poster is a sort of a visual abstract. So in the way that you describe your project or your program in 300 words for the one that what you've submitted for the conference, your poster should be able to do the same thing. So you want to ensure that you're only including really, really important stuff in there. And this is specifically the background. So that's the current state of knowledge or practice, the problem or justification, motivation, question. This is the reason why you did your project. Like, why was it important to do that? Your methods, which is what you did or what you're planning on doing. Your results. So what was the most important finding or one finding? What worked well, what didn't? And conclusions and implications. So why, again, we need to know, why did your project matter? And then obviously you will need some references and probably some acknowledgements. Before you get to that though, you need a title for your poster. Now, some people like to have like one of those really, really catchy titles. I have to admit, I'm not very good at coming up with them. I don't think I'm a very creative person. I usually just go with like the title for my paper or the title of the project or whatever. And either is fine, but make sure it's not like 600 words long. Try to keep it short. Maximum of 15 words is good. You may choose to describe your main finding in your title, because that's what people are going to be able to see really, really clearly, that's what you found. That's a very, very clear result. And it should be clear from your title what your project is about. If you're trying to be too catchy, it might be really, really uninformative and people will just be confused and won't even bother looking. Keep in mind that alliteration can be fun. I have an example there. Practice policy and possibilities. Who doesn't love a little bit of alliteration? And again, avoid jargon in your title. Make sure that it's in clear English. So the first section is the background section. And this is where you're talking about your current state of knowledge or practice. And you might do this in a few dot points, to be honest. You need to provide your relevant background information and provide the context in which you will be describing your results. And this also helps you justify why you did your project and to explain the impacts of your project in your results and conclusions. So an example there for us, our go-to, I suppose my go-to is to do a lot of my work, rural and remote context, workforce shortages, health service accessibility. I might have one dot point for each of those. The second section is your problem, justification, motivation, or question. So this is where you're explaining why your project or program was needed. So you might want to state your research question if that's applicable, or your aims or objectives of your project or program. And you can name this like justification or motivation if you want to, or if you would prefer, you can just make it part of your background. Just ensure that you have this there because this is your justification for why you have done your project. So if I build this off my background from the previous slide, my justification for my project was that there was a lack of allied health services in a community. So therefore, I implemented Project X. For your methods, this is where you talk about what you did. And make sure that you are very brief on this because the methods is rarely the most interesting part of your project. So how did you collect and analyze your data? You might want to talk about your sampling and recruitment, or if you followed a literature review process, or if you followed a particular methodology or what your analysis was, but keep it brief and describe them, but don't go too overboard. For your results, this is where you want to talk about the most important finding, and that is finding one, maybe two, but you want to try and have a pretty limited word count. Like I said, this is sort of like an abstract, a visual abstract. So you don't list every single finding. What was the most important, one or two? And don't try and list everything because again, it just gets overwhelming. Only use tables and graphs if that's really, really necessary. Clearly, if you've done some kind of statistical analysis, you're likely to want to include some kind of graph, and that's okay. But if you're only reporting on one finding, maybe remove all the other information from the graph and only keep that one finding in there. So you're only displaying the essential data for what you're reporting. And if you can use things like emojis and icons because they draw the eye. They make people interested, and people, for most of them, they very clearly represent what they mean. For your conclusions or your main takeaway, this is where you're going to talk about why your project matters. So why is it significant? And why are your outcomes important? Because this is the whole reason you did it. Did you add to the evidence base? Did you apply a new technique or program in the rural context? Did you fill a service gap? Did you evaluate patient experiences which are going to improve your service or process? This is where you want to make sure, and you can emphasize this, like make this section larger in your poster so that people can see, oh, well, that's the title and that's the issue and that was the outcome. And people should be able to tell in 20 or 30 seconds why you did your project and why it was meaningful. Then they can read the other stuff if they really want to, like the methods. As for your references and acknowledgements, with your references, like you do still need to include them. It is an academic output, but only include the most important research papers or the ones that you've cited in your presentation. If you have written a paper with 75 references, do not put 75 references on your poster. And ensure that you're using correct referencing style for your discipline or field, but things like APA are very, very text heavy within like the poster text. So something like Vancouver is good because it's just the little superscript number. And as for acknowledgements, you might want to acknowledge your team, if you got a TARC seed grant, you might want to acknowledge Ray. You might have had students helping you, community organisations, your advisors, your work, anyone else that you think needs to be acknowledged. You might want to pop a little bit of text on the poster saying that. Other considerations for you might be having a QR code that links to your paper or your report if it's published and on the internet, or even to your research profile. So that, if you've done a whole lot of work on this project, you might be able to be like, well, just check my research profile. You can see all the work I've done on this. Make sure that you include all the authors and their job titles, institutions, departments, college, or project team name if that's relevant. Your contact details. Again, someone might want to ask you a question about your project. So make it so that they can do that. And your organisation's logo so everyone knows where you're from. As for questions, I personally really don't like being asked questions, but I will do it for if anyone has any today. And it can be really, really nerve-wracking, but you can try to prepare yourself, and ask yourself, is there anything about your study that's unusual or controversial? Hopefully not too controversial, but anyway. Someone might just want some clarity. So let's say that you did apply a methodology and you've only given a brief description. They might say, oh, how did you do that in that context? And can you tell me more about that step? And that's good. That means that your post has drawn them in. And some people just want to make a comment. They might just want to tell you it's good. Maybe they want to show you how smart they are. And it's okay if you can't answer a question. You can always say to someone, oh, can I catch up with you in the break? Can I catch up with you at lunchtime? Can I grab your email and I'll get back to you after the conference when I've had time to think about it? So just going back over the poster structure and layout, you have your background, your justification, motivation, whatever you want to call it, your methods. So this is where you're kind of forming a story with your poster. You have, so this is what we know, but this is what we didn't know. So therefore, this is what we've done. This also makes it a little bit more interesting. And then you have your result, if you can have two if you like, but one is good. And your conclusion. So again, this is the so what factor. Why did you actually do your research? Why is it going to make an impact? Why is it important? A good tip is to not actually start writing on your poster, start writing it in a document, because otherwise, and then copy and paste it later, because it's just a little bit easier to edit the text in a document than on a PowerPoint slide. And do try to limit your word count. So 250 to 300 words, again, about the size of an abstract is a really, really good number. And it helps you make sure that you're actually only including the essential information. And it might take a while of you reading through that document to really work out what is the best and most important stuff to include. And again, don't include an abstract because a poster is an abstract. Like I said earlier again, check the conference guidelines for orientation and size. A0 is very large, so you will have plenty of room, but do keep in mind that this can cause issues with pixelation of images, but I'll get to that a bit more at towards the end of the presentation. Don't have too many graphs, and if you do, ensure that they're easy to understand. And you might find it helpful to sketch a layout to get an idea of how you're going to plan your poster and how you're going to position your little sections. Now a little bit of information about graphic design. Avoid using really, really bright colors that are going to burn people's retinas, like fluoro pink and green on bright yellow. Like I said earlier, don't use dark on dark or light on light. You need contrast. Use a dark text on a light color or a light text on a dark color, because otherwise people just won't be able to read it. If you have any images, make sure that the resolution is high so that they won't be pixelated, and make sure things are consistent. So the font, the text size, the colors, the section heading positions, line spacing, sentence case, like it's pretty easy to overlook things, but it's good to make sure that everything is consistent, because otherwise it can be a little bit distracting and make your poster look a bit bad. Again, I'm going to say bad there. Using dot points is really, really helpful, and it helps you just include the main parts. You don't need all those superfluous bits. I'm probably better at writing than speaking myself, so. And avoid including full paragraphs unless it's a quote. If you've done a qualitative paper and you have a really, really meaningful quote, obviously you should include that, but just make sure maybe you only include the one most important quote. As for color, make sure it's good to have a color scheme. It helps you be consistent. So you should have a primary color, an accent color, and a text color. And you can have a couple of optional colors as well. But again, keep everything consistent. If you have a dark tone, use the dark tone and then use light on top of it, or vice versa. If you're including images or photos, you can use the eyedropper tool, which is in PowerPoint, it's in Canva, it's in probably everything. And you can use colors that are in that image and then apply it and use that as your accent or use that as your background color. And this helps the image fit with the poster. So for example, if I really, really wanted to, if JCU didn't already have 10,000 templates that I can access really easily, I could use my eyedropper and I could get this specific little color of blue from this James Cook University logo, and I could apply it to something else in my presentation. It just helped keep it nice and consistent. And if you're using a template, use those colors. So an example here of having a color palette for your poster. Again, this is from Animate Your Science. They have all this stuff available for free. It's really, really great. You know, blue and yellow contrast pretty well. This poster example is not overwhelming. It has a nice pretty little bee in it to attract my attention. When it comes to font, there are two types of font, serif and sans serif. So you can think of serif font as with moustaches, which is the little line at the bottom of the words and at these little things. So they can be harder to read for people, especially if you're at a distance. So avoid using those for your poster. It's best to use sans serif fonts like Calibri, Arial, Aptos, etc. Don't use Comic Sans unless you have created a comic for your poster, and then that's probably the only exception to that rule. Don't use creative fonts as they're really difficult to read and a little bit childish. I used to like them when I was in high school, but I'm an adult now, apparently, and I don't use them anymore. And don't use multiple fonts. Like having a heading font and a body font is okay, but don't use a different font in every single section of your poster because, again, that will just be distracting. For size of your font, this is for an A0 size poster. You want your title to be about 90, so it's nice and large. Your headings about 60 and your body text about 40. And it should be readable from a meter away because it's unlikely that you're going to have people wanting to crowd really, really close to your poster in order to read it. And use bold or capitals sparingly, only for headings or if you really, really want to emphasize. So, for example, if you do include a quote, you might want to bold a particular part in that quote to make sure that people's attention is drawn to that specific part of the quote. If you are including tables and graphs, try to make them visually appealing and easy to read. So you can use colors, icons, emojis, you know, happy, sad, agree, disagree, patient experiences. Heat map, shading to indicate scores, like darker for a high score, lighter for a low score. Make sure if you're putting in a graph that people can understand what the X and Y axis actually are. And again, it should be understandable at a glance to someone who is not an expert in your field or your methodology. This is an example that I really like from a paper of a table. I can tell, I mean, I'm not an expert in whatever it is this is, but I can see that it's an experiment done on mice with milk, and these markers increased when they had that milk. And for this one, there was no change. That's really, really clear to me. I don't need to be a scientist to understand that. Whereas if we go to something like this, I could probably stare at that for half an hour and not really be sure what any of that means. I don't know if any of you feel the same. There's a good way to do a table and there's a bad way to do a table. It is good to include images because they make your poster interesting and engaging. And, you know, what's more interesting and quick to understand? 78% extremely satisfied or 78% smiley face? I can tell that that person is very happy with their experience. Having little icons for things like demographics, like 63% female, and again, having the little mouse versus with the milk versus the water, it's very, very clear representation of what that means. There's a reason why we use street signs like this rather than writing the text out. A really useful graphic design, thing is called negative space. And this is the absence of content. So having no text or images or patterns or background textures. And this helps you to draw attention to the really important stuff that you've included in your poster. So just because there's a space, it does not mean that you need to fill it. Don't look at it and think, oh, I don't have enough content, because you probably do. And having too many things like background patterns and images makes your poster really, really busy and distracting and difficult to look at. So think of it as a less is more. Examples of this that are used in graphic design that you might be familiar with are Yahoo and Google. This is what Yahoo looks like. Again, this is like those posters, a bit overwhelming. There's so much content on this page, I don't even know where to look first. And then you go to good old Google. Look at that. Beautiful. That's a negative space used very effectively. And which one do we all use? You don't say Yahoo it, do you? You say Google it. A really useful, another graphic design technique that's useful is called the rule of thirds. So this is also used particularly in photography. It's also used in things like advertising. So if you rule up an imaginary 3x3 grid on your computer, on your screen, sorry, on your poster, and place elements near where that intersection or line is, that's where the eye sort of naturally goes. It draws the eye to these areas. And in posters, you can use this for like the location of your images or important features. You might want to offset your title 1/3 to the right. Because it just, I don't know, just the way our brains work, I suppose. So here I've got an imaginary grid, or it's not imaginary anymore. I've put it there. And this is the spot on where the eye is naturally drawn. It's probably because in the Western world, we read left to right from top to bottom. So that's where your eye is naturally going to go. But other places that people look are generally, so that's the first, second, third, and fourth. So you can also keep that in mind when you're designing your poster. It's really important to make sure that you're using high quality images, because imagine that you've put all this effort into your poster and you pay $100 to get it professionally printed, and you get it back from the printer, and if the images that you've included looked great on your computer screen, but when it's blown up to A0 size, it's all fuzzy and pixelated and looks terrible. So make sure that you aim for the highest resolution possible for your images, or 300 dpi. If you're using a photo, like sometimes if I see photos, I like send them to myself on Facebook. Try not to do that, because Facebook shrinks the size and quality of your photo and it won't be as good. And you can also remove backgrounds from images with white or colored backgrounds so that they fit in better with your poster. If you want to find out how many DPI your image has, when it's in your computer, you can right click it and go to properties and go to, I think it's details, and this tells me how many pixels and how many DPI an image is. So whatever the picture is that I check this with, I would not include that on a poster, because when it's stretched and enlarged for an A0 poster, it's going to look terrible. There's a particular type of images called vector images, which are different to, you're probably familiar with PNGs and JPEGs. So vectors don't have a fixed number of pixels, and they can be enlarged without loss of quality. PNGs are usually higher quality than a JPEG, and JPEGs are very standard, but again, they might be lower quality. If you are using stock images in your poster, make sure you check usage rights like Creative Commons, etc. Sometimes you have to pay for images, so make sure that you are aware of that. You should be citing your images if you've gotten them off the internet. And places where you can find images or vectors are things like Pixabay and Free Vector. So something on Google Images is not actually necessarily free to use. So just be aware of that. You also need to print your poster, unless you're doing an e-poster. It's a good idea to print like an A3 version of your poster. And this just helps you kind of see it as it's going to be printed. You can check that the margins look right and are lined up properly. The placement of all your sections and images. Do the colors look okay? It's really good to ask for feedback from a colleague on what your poster looks like, because sometimes when you've been working on something for a few hours, you just get absolutely blind to it and you can't kind of view it objectively anymore. Or you might, maybe you have really low confidence and you think everything you make looks terrible and you need someone to come and tell you that actually that looks all right. I'm kind of one of those people that's a bit guilty of that. you need to make sure that you know where you can print it. In a place like Mount Isa, we're pretty limited with where you can get A0 things printed, but there are options. But if you live in a city, I'm pretty sure Officeworks does printing and things like that, so you can go there. You have to select your paper. Do you want matte? Do you want gloss? I would go with matte because gloss can be very reflective and shiny, and you don't want that. And you also have to put thought into how you're going to transport your poster. If you've just got a little overnight bag and then you've got a massive poster roll, where are you going to put it? It's not going to fit in your suitcase. Are you going to have to put it in your carry-on luggage? Are you going to have to put it in the overhead lockers on the plane? Make sure that you're keeping that in mind as well. And then as we get towards the end of this presentation, we're going to ask, so what makes a good or an effective poster? So again, animate your science. You should Google it after this presentation. This is an example of a great poster design. We have a good title, we have some good images, we have a nice color palette. It's quite pleasing to look at. So here are some examples. I would actually say that this poster is it has got a lot of content on it, to be honest. However, I mean, it's pretty clear what it's about. I can see right away that this is about crabs. I can see that they've measured crabs. I can see where the crabs are in the world. They have a pretty cool, catchy title. They have cool headings like crustacean domination. Rhyming is also good. They have infographics that are meaningful. Like I can see that is that a mangrove? It says estuary. They're from estuaries and ports. So there's a boat, there's a port. Yep, that's cool. And then they have the important bits down the bottom here. So what does it all mean? Another example of an effective poster is this one here. So it's probably a little bit simpler, but it has a really clear title. And then I also included this one because you don't have to have a catchy heading. Again, I'm really bad at coming up with those. You can just have introduction, methodology, discussion, and results and conclusions. Having a little image to catch your eye that's representative of the topic, having some infographics, and not wasting space with 100 references. They've only got the 3 most important ones there. Some useful design programs for creating posters. First one is obviously PowerPoint. And this is simply because people generally know how to use PowerPoint. It's Microsoft. We use these programs day to day. It's mainstream and it's going to be familiar to most people. It's got a pretty small learning curve and you probably have access to it via your workplace or your university. And it includes things like icons, stock photos, color themes, design templates, etc. I mean, it doesn't include poster-specific design templates, but it does have templates. And you can just change the size so that it's going to be A0 and portrait if that's what you need to do. Canva, if anyone is familiar with Canva, I love Canva myself. It's an Australian web-based design program. You can use it for free. However, there are paid premium options available and the free stuff is getting harder and harder to access. I think they're trying to push people to use the paid option. It does have a bit of a steeper learning curve than PowerPoint, so it might take a while to get used to. But you have access to thousands of templates, icons, graphics, posters, etc. But again, a lot of stuff is only premium and you do have to pay for it. They include heaps of templates, including for scientific posters. You can just kind of go, when it says, what do you want to make? You just write in scientific poster and it comes up with all these templates. Similar to Canva is Adobe Express, which is a web-based design platform by Adobe. Again, like Canva, it's free and paid options are available, but you may get premium for free through your work or university. So if you are with JCU, for example, you can get Adobe Express for free. It may take a while to get used to. It is different to PowerPoint. It's quite similar to Canva though, and you have access to heaps of stuff, including templates, icons, graphics, etc. But again, some of these are premium only. If you're really, really skilled on the computer, you can also use things like Adobe Illustrator, InDesign, or Affinity Designer. However, these probably require a steeper learning curve. They may also be expensive to purchase, though you might get the Adobe ones for free via university or work. But you do have to consider, if you're going to make one poster a year, is it worth you putting in all the time to learn how to use one of these programs and you're only going to use it to make a poster? Probably not. If you have an interest in graphic design, sure, why not? You decide what you want to do. So here's my little promotion for Animate Your Science. If you think you need more advice for poster design, this is their website there. And they have paid courses which may be available through your university, but they have heaps of freely available content on their blog as well, which is very, very helpful. And I have done their course. I got it for free because I'm an HDR student. But I also use their blog, the information on their blog while creating this presentation as well. So I do want to reference them. They're great. Lots of great information on there. And finally, I do have a little, I hope it's okay, Ray, that I've included this QR code so people can critique my presentation. Thank you for attending. If you can scan the QR code or click, I don't have a link in the chat, sorry, I wasn't that organised. You can provide feedback on the workshop. And does anyone have any questions?
There should be lots of questions for people who are trying to design posters. That was an amazing talk. I'm not coordinated enough to kind of do a QR code and speak at the same time because it requires me to do two things, and that's not how I roll. But that was an incredible talk, Catherine. I learned heaps of stuff. And I didn't know I had to be this old before I knew the difference between sans serif and serif and being mustaches. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's impressive.
Well, I mean, it's one of these things that you kind of see and you think, what does that mean? But you don't really worry about it.
Oh, it's amazing.
Really informative as well, Catherine. Your presentation was really effective too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, I'm involved in childbirth education, so it made me reflect on the PowerPoints use if we've got online sessions. So thank you very much, as well as for posters. I've found it useful in another. Well done,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody got a question for Catherine? Joseph liked it too, by the way.
Great. Well, maybe there's no more questions.
Nobody got any questions. You explained it so very, very well. So very, I do have one thing that it's very tangential though, and it's like when you talk about results and you're talking about putting them on your paper, tangentially, what do you think about someone who's done a research project, right? And it didn't quite turn out the way they thought it was going to do, and the results weren't great. Like if it was quantitative, they weren't statistically significant, or the qualitative stuff didn't really pan out the way they thought their hypothesis would go. What would you say to people who had what I'm going to call negative results? And I don't think that, I know that's not the right term, but for people who had something that's not what they thought, should they do anything with that or just bury it deep inside?
I think probably any result is a result, even if it's not what you expected. I think that's what you would say to anyone who was planning on. I mean, imagine if you spent 7 years doing a PhD project and the outcome ended up not being what you thought it was going to be. Does that mean that you've wasted 7 years of your life? I mean, I hope not. As someone doing a PhD, having a result you don't expect is still a result, and it's still worthwhile. Telling people about it.
I agree, and it might stop other people from doing the same thing. So building on what you do rather than repeating something that may not actually be as effective as they think it's going to be. So something that doesn't pan out the way you think it is, I would imagine, is just as important as something that goes exactly to plan. Thank you very much. I'm going to put that down and be famous for it. But I think sharing the things that didn't go well is just as important as sharing the things that do.
And you might have actually found out something really unexpected that other people might be very interested in.
Agree. I did like the QR code for your potential Google Scholar profile too. That's a great idea. And your paper. I mean, isn't that great? I mean, if you have a paper, you can put a QR code there and just link people to it so you don't have to regurgitate the paper in your poster. That's brilliant.
Yeah, and these days everyone knows how to use a QR code.
Yeah, even
Thanks,
I can do that.
Thanks, COVID. We all had to do it so much for that. So yeah, and there is a website called, I think it's called QR Monkey, which you can make different looking QR codes, which are a little bit more interesting.
Nice. Kathy's disappointed that she didn't see this presentation before preparing her poster.
Oh, Kathy.
Never mind. That's always the way.
Next time.
And just to let you know, I think, Natalia, you asked about slide sharing. All of our webinars, all of these webinars are indeed recorded. They are up on the TARC YouTube channel from, I don't know, 2023, 2024, 2025. All of these will be put up there. And this one in particular will be put up there by the end of the week. So yes, you will get all of this information again. Are there any crickets chirping that want to know something else? All right. Nice to see you all. That was really fantastic, Catherine. I learned heaps. It makes me almost want to do a poster. Almost. We'll see. Thanks, guys. See you later.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, Catherine.